One of the most fundamental and maybe most difficult question in life is, why do bad things happen? Those who believe add to that question, why does God allow bad things to happen? Or, as we're discussing today, are bad things part of God's plan? So let's understand, what is creation all about? God creates the world and gives us freedom of choice. How do we have freedom of choice? Because God is concealed. In other words, as he's creating the world, he's making himself imperceptible. It is not obvious that he is creating the world. In fact, it's not really obvious to the eye that the world is created at all. It's only when we use our intelligence and we notice the limitations that creation has. Everything is finite. The entire universe is finite. That's how we come to the conclusion that the world did not create itself, but that some other stronger power created it and imposed limits on it. Otherwise, why would it be limited? So it's only because of our intelligence that we recognize that the world is created at all. We certainly don't see the creator. How does God do that? This is what is called in Kabbalah tzimtzum, the contraction of God's light. Meaning, he is very much present in the world, because without that presence, the world would not exist. But his presence is not revealed. The presence is concealed. That allows us freedom of choice. Because if God were obvious, we would never go against his plan or against his will. Now, where does the concealment have to be the strongest, the thickest, the most opaque? Obviously, in those things where God is most obvious. In other words, the strongest godly light needs more covering to conceal it than the lesser lights. So the most godly presence has to be concealed more, thicker layers of concealment than the less powerful godly sparks or lights. Basically, what the result is that in the worst, in the darkest, in the most ungodly of places, that's where the godliest lights are hidden. So what is bad in the world? That which is most concealed. Why is it most concealed? Because of its potential godliness. The potential godliness is so great that if it were not concealed, it would completely eliminate all freedom of choice. That's the principle of the idea that the higher something is, the lower is its expression. Because the higher something is, the more you need to conceal it if you want to remain anonymous. But let's understand something else. The word bad, we use it carelessly, we use it indiscriminately, and it confuses us. We are told, the Torah says, that no bad comes from above, comes from heaven. How can anything exist that doesn't come from heaven? That's like saying this creation doesn't have a creator. That's kind of an oxymoron. So what does it mean bad does not come from heaven? Then where does it come from? So we have to give the word bad a more specific and a more precise definition. Bad is not the same as sad. Bad is not the same as painful. Bad is not the same as tragic. Bad means that which mustn't happen, should not have happened. Pain is not always bad. Death is not always bad. Even tragedy is not always bad. Bad means it should not have happened. So when an elderly person passes away peacefully in their bed, surrounded by their family, that shouldn't happen. That was wrong. You see, we use the word bad to describe things that not only hurt, feel bad, but that is morally outrageous. What is morally outrageous? Something that happens when it shouldn't. And why does that make us crazy? Because we are created as human beings, as intelligent beings. We are created with a sense of purposefulness. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's an objective, there's a goal, there's a plan, there's a rhythm, a rhyme. Something's happening. When we get the impression that things happen for no reason, without rhyme or reason, that makes us crazy. That destroys us at the deepest, most fundamental part of our humanness. Random, life is meaningless. Someone can die when they should not have died. Well, then nothing makes any sense. And that's why an older person passing away is tragic. We wouldn't call it bad. Nothing bad happened to this family. But if a young person dies, oh, that shouldn't happen. An operation is not a bad thing, although it can be very painful and dangerous. It's not a bad thing, unless it's an operation performed on the wrong patient. Oh, that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. So you see, the word bad has one specific, definite connotation, and that is it's out of control. And that's why we get so upset when we think something is bad. So what is the truth? If the word bad means it should not have happened, I have two questions. First of all, how do we know what should or shouldn't happen? Like when Abraham objected to the destruction of Sodom, he tried his best. He argued and argued and argued, but in the end, God destroyed Sodom. What did Avraham think? This shouldn't have happened? God comes and tells him, I am going to destroy Sodom because they are exceedingly evil. It shouldn't happen. Yeah, if there were 50 righteous people, it shouldn't happen. If there were 40, if there were 30, 20, 10, there weren't. So it happened. In other words, Avraham didn't want it to happen, but when it did, he didn't cry foul. It was still a tragedy, but you couldn't call it bad. So Avraham maybe didn't know why it had to happen, but he knew that it did have to happen. It didn't just happen by accident for no reason. So if the word bad means this shouldn't have happened, how do we know? When do we know whether something should or shouldn't have happened? We can't really, can we? We don't know what came before. We don't know what's coming after. We see a little tiny piece of history, And so we're really not in a position to judge whether it should or shouldn't. So why do we pray when something is threatening? Because we know what we want. We want a person who is ill to recover. So we ask for what we want. And we want good things. But when they don't happen, it's not because of some accident, an oversight, or some force in nature that is diabolical. It happens for a reason. So the word bad, if we're using it correctly, has to be a little more restricted, because I can't really be sure that what I'm objecting to should not have happened. I object to what's happening, but I'm not sure it shouldn't have happened. I can't know that. Secondly, and this is the real problem, if something can happen that should not have happened, who caused it? What caused it? If God caused it, then it should happen. If the creator of the world is making it happen, then it's part of creation. If he's not making it happen, then who is? Good God, bad God? Big God, little God? The devil made it happen? Satan made it happen? That's idolatry. So we come to the conclusion. The word bad has a very limited application. It applies only to a human being who has freedom of choice and chooses the wrong thing. My choice can be bad. Why? Because I should not have chosen that. So only the human being with freedom of choice can be bad. A tree can't be bad. Life can't be bad. A stone can't be bad. An animal can't be bad. Only the human being. Angels also can't be bad. And in that sense, we are greater than the angels. Now the question is, if I can be bad, meaning I can choose what I should never have chosen, then if I choose to hurt you, isn't your hurt now bad? Because it came from my choice. My choice should not have happened. I should not have chosen that. So it was the wrong choice producing bad results and consequences. So is that what it means, that the bad doesn't come from heaven, it comes from me? That would make me a god. I don't think so. So here's the really significant conclusion. My evil is in my choice. I choose what I should not have chosen. The outcome, the consequence, the result of that choice, I cannot control. I have no control. I have no control on the success or failure of my choices. So what can I choose? My choice. I want to be a murderer. I choose to be a murderer. I pull the trigger. That's it. Now my choice is over. What happens after I let go of the arrow, so to speak? I can't control the arrow. Now it is out of my control. So it's out of my control, then who is in control? Obviously, the creator of the world. And that's why some people make terrible choices but cannot succeed. Some people make very good choices and it doesn't succeed. So people are judged by their choices. Do they make good choices or bad choices? How successful are they? That's not in their control. So, for example, a guy pulls the trigger intending to kill someone, but misses, or the gun backfires, or is he not a murderer? What does it take to be a murderer? Point the gun and pull the trigger. Beyond that, there's nothing more you can do to be a murderer. So when you pull that trigger, you are a murderer, whether anybody dies or not. Because the fact that you missed doesn't make you less of a murderer. Just means you're the gang that can't shoot straight. Now, of course, in a human court, you would not be held guilty of murder because we don't know what your intention was. Maybe you missed intentionally, which means you never chose to kill. But in God's court, in reality, yes, you are a murderer. So our choices have now become so much more significant because a crime that is victimless is still a crime. Now we are truly responsible for our own morality. So, conclusion. Bad means that which should not happen. That which should not happen can't come from heaven. Because if it's coming from heaven, then it should happen. Then there's a rhyme and a reason, a purpose. So obviously, that which should not happen doesn't come from God. Then what is bad? Only the human being with his freedom of choice can be called bad. And what part of him is bad? His freedom of choice. The only freedom he has is to make a choice. Even in the choice to harm himself. He does what he does to kill himself. Whether he dies or not is not up to him. So when people try to kill themselves and fail, and we of course assume he didn't really try hard enough. No, it could be he tried hard enough, but God said no. So nothing bad ever happened to anyone in history, and it can't. You can make a bad choice, but what happens is not in your control. Therefore, what happens happens for a reason, not because of your bad mood. So we can really understand the story of Joseph and his brothers. They're jealous of him. They sell him into slavery. He becomes the viceroy of Egypt after some pretty difficult, miserable years. And the brothers are certain after they meet him in Egypt, they're expecting him to take revenge. At the very least, hate them and be angry at them. But what does Joseph say to them? You had bad thoughts about me. You planned some bad stuff for me. But what happened was God's plan, and God's plan was good. So why would I be angry at you? This is a very interesting combination of criticism and yet no anger, no resentment, no revenge. See, it's not like he whitewashed. No, I don't care what you did. It's okay. He didn't say that. It was not okay. You had some very bad intentions. And you got to do something about that. You got to get your act together. But me? Why would I be angry at you? What happened to me came from God, not from you. We are not victims of another person's bad choice. And we're not justifying the choice at all. It was a bad choice. Bad means it should not have happened. You should not have chosen. But the consequence of that choice is not to your credit or to your account. Once you made your choice, it was no longer up to you. So now let's go back to the question. Is the evil in the world part of God's plan? The evil in the world is definitely part of God's plan. But what do we mean by evil? By evil, we mean the concealment of truth. Because of the concealment of truth, two things happen. We have freedom of choice, and evil exists. The evil is the concealment of divine energy or of divine sparks that are so powerful that they would take away our freedom of choice if they were visible. So what is the plan? God's plan is that this world, which is the lowest of all creations, as it says right at the beginning of the Torah, God created heaven and earth. There are many layers of heaven. There are many metaphysical worlds. And then there's this world. This world is the lowest of all possible existences. There can be no existence lower than this world, because in this world, we are capable of denying God's existence, of ignoring God's existence. What would be a lower world than this? Or in different words, how much further can you get from your Creator? The next step would be a world in which you are incapable of knowing God. Such a world has no purpose. It's not a relationship. A relationship can get very, very difficult, very dark, but it's a relationship and it's redeemable. But a world in which you cannot know God, what would be the point? what would be the relationship between the Creator and his creation? So this lowest of all worlds is not low because human beings sin. It was created to be the lowest world. Therefore, there is death, not the result of human behavior. True, Adam and Eve descended into the world of death. And that's Adam's argument with God. God said, because you ate from the tree, you created death. And Adam says, no, death was already predicted in the Torah. There are commandments concerning death. So death pre-existed my sin. I descended into death. In other words, he descended from a Garden of Eden, which is kind of heavenly, to the earthy world, the lowest of all worlds, in which there is death, in which there is pain, in which there is struggle. Because to find the truth, to find the goodness, you have to struggle. That's the idea of by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. It won't come easy. But if you do the right things, you produce bread, life-giving, life-supporting. So what is the purpose of the existence of evil? Is to uncover, remove the concealment, and expose the awesome godliness that is contained in this lowest of all worlds. It's almost like, psychologically speaking, your deepest love, your deepest devotion, your deepest connections are not obvious. They're covered by layers of stuff, rationalization, but to uncover those deepest layers, that's worth a lifetime of effort. When you finally get to the most precious, the most intense, the most godly of your emotions and feelings, that was worth it. So God is concealed. His deepest desires, his deepest pleasures have not yet been realized in his creation, but we're working on it, trying to get to the ultimate truth of this world, which will be the ultimate truth of the Creator. And that's what we mean, that God desires that this world, the lowest of all worlds, become his personal dwelling place. Meaning that whatever we've known about God, whatever we can see in creation, whatever creation tells us about him, we haven't gotten to the real him yet. But every time we do a mitzvah, we remove some of those coatings, some of those concealments. We get closer to him, to the truth. Every time we commit a sin, we add more concealment that is going to have to be removed if we're going to get to the truth. So the goal is that the darkest of the dark reveal what is hidden, which is the brightest of the bright. And we seem to be going through that process pretty intensely right now. The polarization of right and wrong, of good and bad, where the good is just pure good and the bad is just pure bad. No more confusion. Or in different words, the bad is not hiding behind good. It's not trying to justify itself. It doesn't have a philosophy. It's just bad. And when that happens, we know we're getting to the end. Because when bad can't be justified, it goes away. It disappears. So is the darkness, the evil, the pain, is that all part of God's plan? Absolutely. And what about the bad, that which should not happen? It too serves a purpose, giving us freedom of choice. And when we make the right choices of our own free will, we are revealing the greatest and the deepest divine potential of this world. So let's make some good choices. When we lift ourselves beyond the bad, we redeem the world, and we show what the world, creation, can be. A world without pain, without death. The end result is that this world will become holier, godlier, more awesome than heaven. Which is why, after God created heaven, he was not content, and he continued to create this world, because it's going to be much greater, much deeper, much more meaningful than heaven with its angels. If we do our share, we can not only benefit, but take a little credit. We'll not only be there when the world becomes perfected, but we'll actually have a sense of satisfaction that we actually did something. We partnered with God in making the world godly.